watch the world passing by. With you by my side, maybe this ride can make things right. Speeding up, blurring out the lights. Soon your eyes will be the only blue. Give me more minutes of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is a chance to forget. We could go nowhere. Give me more hours of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is a chance to escape. Let's go nowhere. Gotta wish tonight, baby, please set your thoughts aside. 'Cause it's been so long, maybe we could drive into the dawn. Speeding up, blurring out the lights. Soon your eyes will be the only blue. Give me more minutes of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is a chance to forget. We could go nowhere. Give me more hours of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is a chance to escape. Let's go nowhere.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session webinar on multicultural teams and how to get the best of it. A special, very warm welcome to Signe and Julia, and I would so much have loved to also say welcome to Nico, but Nico has come down with COVID, so he is at home coughing his lungs out, and he is very, very sorry, and we are very sorry that Nico cannot be here. And this is making our team a little less multicultural, to be honest. So let's just put it up front here now that this is the case. But anyhow, we'll try to do our best to cover all the perspectives that Nico would potentially have touched upon anyhow. Nico's perspective is enabling founders and also helping them build great multicultural teams. And he comes from a background within HR where he has joined the startup world as both an investor, an advisor, and also, as I said, an enabler. And he does that with a background from being a French guy married to someone from another nationality living in a third country, not even France. And so he brings a wealth of experience from that endeavor. And then he also has this perspective of looking at when you invest in teams, then you should look for diversity. So we will have to try, Signe and Julia and I, to cover that perspective of why is that important and why does diversity matter in the first place when we speak about multicultural teams. So that's the theme of today's webinar. And I would very much love for you, Signe, to start out introducing yourself.
Yes. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Pernille, for inviting me. And I'm very happy to be here with you, Julia. My background is diplomacy. I was there for 20 years in the Danish Foreign Service. I'm a lawyer of background, and today I left 6 years ago and created on my own business as a leadership coach. And also had a research project for 3-4 years together with the Confederation of Danish Industries and University of Copenhagen, amongst other good partners, to look at how do we actually integrate and welcome internationals to Denmark. And this is what I also work on today with leaders coming in from the outside, how to navigate in Denmark with their leadership skills and with the special challenges and opportunities that are in Danish workplaces.
Awesome. And we are looking so much forward to hearing also your perspectives on having been a foreigner yourself, living and leading in another country, and how to maybe mitigate the challenges that might possess, but also maybe the opportunities. So we'll hear more about that later. Julia, welcome. Why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Yeah, very happy to be here, Pernille. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm the General Manager for Diagnostics at Siemens Healthineers for the Northwest Europe region. I've been living in Denmark now for almost 6 years. And before that, I lived and worked in the USA for 10 years. I'm originally from Germany, so I have quite a bit of multicultural background. I've also lived for many years in France. I lived and worked there. So happy to be here today and share some of the experience and ideas I have.
Awesome, Julia. Thank you for joining us. And also, Julia, could you tell us a little bit about the teams you are leading? Because I know from not only looking at your LinkedIn profile, but also investigating a little bit into what it actually is you do, that you have quite a diverse team, right? That within your daily, day-to-day tasks, you deal with people from many different cultures, but also in your own teams, you seem to be very, very diverse. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's true. So right now I'm leading a team that spans across 10 countries, Great Britain Island, but also the Nordic countries and the Baltic countries. And in my previous job in the global headquarters of diagnostics in the USA, I was putting together a team in global marketing that was very multicultural, not just Americans, but also gentlemen from Korea, from France, from Germany, and not all working together physically, but also remote working was a very interesting aspect of putting the team together and working, collaborating.
Yes, so you bring that well experience from having not only to theoretically look at it, but also really dealing with it and leading teams from many different backgrounds, so coming with many different backgrounds, as you do, Signe. So Signe, your background within diplomacy has brought you a wealth of experience in the first place before you actually went into the endeavor you're on now. Can you tell us a little bit about what perspectives that gave you and maybe how it sparked your interest for multicultural teams in the first place?
Yeah, in a way, it's interesting because after having returned to Denmark, and started working with internationals in Denmark, I suddenly realized that there was a thing called culture. And you'd think that I would have known that for 20 years working across the world. But I think coming from law and diplomacy, it's this famous, when you are a hammer, everything looks like nails. So when we encountered differences, they were often differences of opinion or differences of stemming from power or societal differences, politics, interests. I had simply not been trained in culture, and it's a little bit embarrassing to say, because you'd think, then just read up and do your own studying, right? And of course you do, but coming from a background in diplomacy, you then study about other cultures, and you can of course talk about Denmark, but knowing where the conflicts pop up and how I react myself in that was not my deep awareness. So having traveled around, and when I look back at it, seeing how my cultural background of being a Dane and being very Danish in the, I like to be straightforward and really honest with everyone, and then I believe that they will be really honest with me, and I can, that kind of Danishness is not always easy to travel with, and I stumbled with that, and it's been a very it's been a good experience. Humbling
and humbling. So what you're actually saying is you kind of discovered all of a sudden that some of the challenges you maybe ran into, or misunderstandings or whatever you encountered, was also based on the fact that you grew up in this setting with this set of values and ways of looking at things that we take for granted in the Nordic region, and then you move abroad, and then you meet people who have different backgrounds, and then you encounter certain challenges. Is that true? Yes.
And some of the because it sounds banal, but my experience is that a lot of us are a little bit banal when it comes to this, because it's not our main subject area. Culture is not something that we do for a living. We do our professional subject area, and then we do leadership. But having the extra angle along with maybe psychological insights or whatever, it's not something that's natural. So we, as a CEO that I interviewed this morning, he said, we tend to go after what the intuition tells us, because that's what we have been taught to look after. But intuition and the easiest way to go is not necessarily where you need to go when you are working in cross-cultural teams. So you actually need to go against your intuition, stop for a moment and think, why did I get into that conflict? My intuition might be because he's an idiot. But when you think that, then you should stop. And maybe there's more to it. Might there be another angle to this that could help us explain what's happening? That's a deeper insight, something that's maybe not as helpful to me as a person, but will be helpful to my company or my organization.
To act upon and in terms of behavior. And Julia, that brings me to you. And I would like to ask you, so when you are leading multicultural teams, what is it you encounter, and what kind of things have you considered in terms of making that team work the best together?
Yeah. I just before I answer your question, I wanted to say I really can relate to what Sina just said, because we haven't been taught really about culture, and hence we follow intuition. The only exception I personally found is when it's visibly another culture. For example, Asia or Africa, right? And we are from the white Caucasian Western world, assuming going to the US or going to the UK only. We assume, well, probably the same. We speak the same language, look the same. Sorry, I don't want to generalize. Certainly, there's some diversity, but it's assumed, right? We follow intuition, and then yet there's a big difference. Even going just to Europe, there may be a big difference. So, but to answer,
issue with your internet connection, Julia. Do you also hear it, Sina?
No,
it's just me.
No. Yeah. I heard Julia, and just to say, Julia, I think you're so right that we can have these assumptions, and then we stumble and are surprised at the challenges we meet when we discuss with Americans on how to work together. The differences that we meet, for example. Right. So really interesting.
Yeah. But to your question, Pernille, how to overcome that? I would like to say, in general, I believe in that people want the best. They signed up to work in a multicultural team. They work towards a common goal. So assuming that people really want the best is, I think, the best assumption you can do, and then create an awareness for the cultural differences. But often it's not even the cultural backgrounds that create conflict, is my experience, right? Conflict or dysfunctional team has many, many root causes. And but to avoid conflict that comes from a cultural background, or even it's easy to say, well, it's because he is from she is from a different culture, and hence we don't get along. I think to overcome that, the best is to create awareness for the differences in culture.
And how do you do that? How do you do that?
Yeah, one tool that I really appreciated, that I learned from a great manager that I had, was it called it creating diversity moments. So it's a very easy tool, and actually pairing people up one-on-one, taking out 4 or 5 minutes, and following a very simple agenda of what were you born into. what was the social background, what was maybe religion, what were you the firstborn or the lastborn, are you the siblings, were your parents working, or parents same sex or different sex? So really not covering the topics that can't be found on LinkedIn, right? And just takes 4 minutes each, and you suddenly get to know each other on a very different grounds, and that's creating an awareness for difference in culture, but also awareness for difference in, or for the diversity that exists in a team.
Yeah, and what you're saying is that this can be done even if you don't have that many different cultural backgrounds in the team, just personalities or different upbringings or whatever. So in order to instill trust, or why would that help, or what's the
I'm a strong believer, and I think that is very much anchored also in the Nordic culture, that a well-functioning team is based on trust. And how do you build trust? Typically, in German or Nordic culture, I trust because you do what you say and you say what you do, right? We in the Nordics very much are brought up that way, and we are very much sticking to appointments. We are on time, punctual. We say, we do what we say. Often when I came to Denmark, I was really surprised. Danes like to plan ahead, like months ahead, and you don't need to check in, confirm, like that would be the case in the US, but they show up because they said so 2 months ago. Whereas in the US, is the culture that where I lived in for 10 years, right? It's typical you reconfirm, maybe you push it out, or you take a rain check, right? Do you know, you've heard that expression. So it's which creates in a Nordic or German culture a bit of maybe mistrust. Why do I need to reconfirm? Rain check, what's that? So there's another way of building trust there, right? So trust, maybe that's also something to explore in a multicultural team. Why do you trust? How do you build trust? But it's a conversation, I think, worth investing in.
Exactly. And have you found it different from how do you build trust in when you lived in the US compared to Denmark, compared to other places in the world where you have been based?
Certainly there are differences, how quickly you can earn trust. And I think in the Nordic and Denmark, it is generally more of a trust-based society. It's more assumed, whereas in other cultures you have to earn it. That's for example, saying in German, you have to earn it. And my personal experience is to meet the people on a human level. That's how you create trust.
Yeah, and so your diversity moments, that having little exercise with the teams help them build trust. Yeah. So Signe, what's your opinion on trust, and what have you experienced when it comes to working with multicultural teams?
It's such an interesting and challenging issue, because trust, Denmark has the world record in trust. I think something like 72% of Danes trust at someone in the street that they don't know already. So having this initial trust for a stranger is very, very high in Denmark. But the flip side, of course, is also, if I as a leader trust my employees to do what they're supposed to do, that is pushing responsibility to the employees. So I had one leader in a workshop I had, and he said, I have to share the fact that it was incredibly embarrassing for me. He was a Dane. He said, I employed a very, very, very qualified Chinese woman. And after I thought she was great, I was very happy with her. She arrived, it was in Aarhus. She settled in Aarhus. Everything was great. After 2 months, she quit, left Denmark, went home to China, and wrote to him that the huge burden that he had put on her from day one was unbearable, and that she had been going into depression and had to leave the job immediately. And for him, he said, my self-image had been like, I'm a great leader. I manage people so well. They're so happy to be in my team. How could this happen to me, that I lost someone? I mean, a huge investment for the company and a huge embarrassment for him. And this gave a large discussion in the company about what is it, the impact of the Danish trust responsibility on even young people coming in, saying, you run with it. You just run with it. This is yours. But not everyone is comfortable running with it. So having, so for HR, for leadership, knowing that you have to figure out, who am I employing here when I onboard someone? Let's figure out, what are your limits for what you feel comfortable in? What is your development zone? Are you uncomfortable here, or do you feel safe? Because safe and trust is not necessarily the same. If I feel that I'm being trusted too much, I don't feel safe. I feel very, very insecure, and especially moving to another country, the stress. I mean, Julia, you know this, and Pernille, you have moved many times. We are unsettled in the first place, both physically. We eat something different. The time zones are different. People are different. I don't have my trusted people around me. So now I step into a new workplace, and they just place a huge burden on me.
Your job.
Yeah,
exactly.
So trust is such an important. It's crucial for teamwork, and it has to be delivered in ways that each of us can handle, depending on and that we can understand, that we can make sense of in our context. Is my experience. Julia, does that ring true? Sorry, Pernille.
Yeah, absolutely. I can also relate to that. And when I first came to the Nordics, and coming from the US, where different work culture exists in the office, right? And coming to Denmark and working with Norwegian and Swedish colleagues, where I found, for example, the topic of working hours. Calling someone in Norway after 4 p.m. I had to find trust, and it doesn't mean that they're not working. It doesn't mean that they're not effective only because they're having dinner at 4 p.m. Maybe I exaggerated a bit, forgive me. But trusting in the work ethics and the people still wanting the best and being effective isn't related necessarily to when they leave the office.
Yeah, and that was something you had to learn. Was that not the norm from where you grew up?
No. It's been 16 years, not to step on the toe of any Germans here in the audience, but what I remember from working in Germany, you don't leave before your boss.
All right.
And that can be definitely 5 p.m., 6 p.m. or later, but you don't leave before. Here, and when I first came to Denmark, I often found myself being the last one in the office, waving my arms to get the lights back on, right? So I was surprised when everyone left, or even I was approached about when I had made a comment in a meeting saying, well, maybe we do that over the weekend. Oh, Julia, you can't just say that. Over the weekend, that's unheard of. But that, again, doesn't mean that Danes are lazy by any means, right? Highly effective. I really still am amazed by power lunches. Lunches being taken in 20 minutes. Whereas in France, it's entre midi et deux, 2 hours with a glass of wine.
So the how we divide the time and how we look at time also differs. So I want to show you just a little graph here that maybe speaks to what you are speaking about here, because we know from research, and Erin Meyer has written this amazing book called the Culture Map. And in this book, she explains how some of their challenges, but also opportunities, I'll come back to that later, is around communication, whether we have, high context or low context, evaluation, how do we prefer to be evaluated, and what are we used to in terms of that? The same with leading, are we more egalitarian or hierarchical? And what about deciding, how do we make decisions? Do we expect people to be involved in the decision making, or is it easier for us to just make a decision and move on and trust the leader to do so? And what about trust, which we already talked about? Is it relationship based, or is it maybe more task based? You have to prove it, you have to earn it. And when we disagree, how do we feel about that? Do we like, confrontation, and we like to put things on the table from the beginning, or do we rather avoid it? And what about scheduling, the time issue? Do we show up when we say we do, or do we have slack in there? Is it okay to be a little bit late, or is it actually not looked too well upon if you're completely orderly all the time? And what about persuasion? How do we do that? What's the best negotiation strategies in different cultures? So what you're talking about here seems to cover many of these topics here that Erin Meyer also has found in her research sometimes create conflicts, but also opportunities. So Julia, could you maybe talk a little bit about those different dimensions? What does this resonate a bell with you, or ring a bell with you?
Yeah, so it's interesting how research puts that in a theory. That's great. I certainly can relate to some of those. For example, the feedback culture, direct versus indirect language.
Yeah.
An example would be when I was in the US, and we would have a big talent review amongst the management team. And then the talk came to someone who, in my experience, was not the greatest performer. And then there was talk in the room about, oh yeah, there is actually really a big potential. And I thought, big potential? For a German, that sounds really good. Someone who can climb the ladder. But no, in American language, that's just the way of saying there's a gap. There's a potential to be filled. It's not meeting the expectations, right? Other examples I like from the American language that is somewhat maybe passive aggressively saying, "Oh, that's interesting." It's not interesting. Yeah, in a German language, it's like, "Wow, he finds that interesting." Yes, or "Oh, that's different."
Yeah.
But it's not that they mean that's different. It's just different from they think, and it actually doesn't work at all.
Okay.
Those are the nuances that I found difficult to learn when I first got to the US, with that type of pillowing, packaging the feedback in a positive first, then you can come with your critique and then end on a high note, on a positive note. I found that really, really difficult to grow into. And
Yes.
I was in a management training, and I was recommended early on, well, try to fake it until you make it. And that's just not the culture that I grew up in. Yeah, being direct, being transparent, being completely brutally honest was sometimes the feedback.
And so I want to come back to that, but first I want to hear, Signe, a little bit about how this resonates with you, because I know you also promised in the preview leading up to this webinar, talking a little bit about language, because this is something you've also digged into also in your research. And now Julia mentions the two phrases, that's interesting and that's different, or there's great potential, and how it can be perceived very differently depending on the culture. Yeah.
It's interesting how when I say interesting, I mean I'm curious about I'm curious about how large a role language has had in our research, because we actually, when we started looking at how to onboard internationals, well, in Denmark, we didn't think language would play a large role, because we thought that the larger companies had a language policy and that was it. That's naive, of course, to think back on. But what turned out was that there are just as many takes on language than there are companies. So which goes back to what Julia said before, that personality or organizational culture has just as much to say about cross-cultural cooperation than culture itself. So these issues pop up. Language is surprisingly tricky also for many Danes, no matter whether we have an education or not, whether we've gone to university or not. Some of us, there was an partner in an architectural firm who said to me, I feel as if my IQ is lowered by 20 percentage points when I speak English.
Oh,
and
yeah.
the impact of that in your work life is it's tangible. and it impacts the way you feel when someone steps in through the door and you have to switch your language from Danish to English. And it impacts the way when I say something, I'm not quite sure that I'm expressing myself well, that people are receiving what I'm sending out in the world. And it makes me unsure. It unsettles me a little bit. And I have to then take on another layer of it, asking, how did you actually understand what I just said? And this extra layer is, of course, something that can slow things down. I can feel as if I sound stupid, and I can feel as if I'm not being adequately clear. So the language imposes another layer of complication, even when people speak English, all of them speaking it as a second language.
Yeah, exactly. And there's actually a great comment here from one of the participants out there listening in at the moment, saying interesting can mean many things. I agree. Undertones and context and all that change everything, right? And so what you're actually saying is asking, what did you hear me say? What are you left with? And maybe slowing down a little bit as a leader to ensure that what was said, or what was the message that came across, how was it received in the other end?
And here, can I just follow up on that? Because here one of my big issues is it's wonderful if we can stay in the unknowing kind of I'm not quite sure I know anything here. Let's talk about it. So that's a beautiful concept. And it's also culturally more acceptable in Northern Europe than it is in Asia. In Asia, you could be in a spiritual sense, but when it comes to work, you'd better know. So stepping into as a leader into the unknowing, it's a little bit on the tricky side, and still we have to do it somehow in a culturally adequate way, because culture can trip us up if we don't slow down, as you say, Pernille.
Yeah, but it also speaks to respect, and how do you earn respect? And I want to draw in actually a question from one of the participants here, or listeners. Any practical examples on great management behavior and habits on balancing showing trust and on the other side driving accountability? And I don't know, Julia, if you would like to speak to this question, because what you talked about before was this having to figure out, when can I trust you? And can I trust you even if you leave at 4 p.m. or earlier and take your weekends off? And how do you then figure out if people deliver? What's a fine balance here?
But that's an interesting question. And maybe, coming from a German culture originally, and as I said earlier, in Denmark, it's more the assumed trust. Whereas in Germany, you have to earn it. And typically in Germany, you earn it because you hold yourself accountable. Like you say, I'm going to deliver this at that point in time. And then you do. And that's how you earn the trust. So for me, these two really go hand in hand. I mean, of course, the question is balancing showing trust and on the other hand, driving accountability.
So it's always a question of empowerment and delegation, right? And how you, in some countries, when you empower, you in the Nordic countries maybe can assume that people get it when you say, so next week we have this deadline on Thursday where we need to come up with a solution for project B. Will you take a look at that? And then the person says yes, and then you leave them there. But do you then follow up and say, hey, how is it going? Did you get what the deadline was? Do you need any help? So there's a little bit of a fine balance figuring out how much to follow up, how much would be perceived as micromanagement. Because based on also the book I wrote called On the Move, where we looked into Nordic culture and how we in the Nordics assume a lot of responsibility as employees because we grew up that way. We were expected to deliver on our own, like you also touched upon earlier. but then it can also be perceived as negligence, as that you forget about me. You gave me this task and then you just left me there, like you said, Signe, with the employee from China who felt maybe the burden of the responsibility, and that wasn't fair. You should have followed up more. You should have asked me, well, how is it going? And finding that balance between, giving away empowerment and really delegating the task to people, but also following up. And Julia, I want to also ask you, before you said something about how important trust is, and that it's some of the rules that accounts for multicultural teams are more or less general rules for building high-performing teams in the first place, right? So there's this research by Lencioni, who talks about the 5 traits of high-performing teams. Most people know him from the book where he talks about the traits of teams that do not deliver. But basically, the recipe is building trust and having healthy conflicts, and then people committing to buying into what it is they are to do, and then they are delivering and doing what they say they'll do, and that will create results. How do you do that in a multicultural team with all these different expectations towards maybe leadership and what's a great leader and how much do you follow up? How have you mitigated those differences, Julia?
Yeah, my experience is that the most important is that everyone is aligned behind the same vision and strategy. That everyone understands really what the North Star is and where do we want to go and how do we measure it? How do we measure those results? What are the outcomes that we are looking after? Right? Results can be a lot of different things. And it's sometimes shocking when I ask in the team, so what are our key KPIs? What are our KPIs? And just jot it down on a post-it, everyone, and then it's amazing how many different answers you get. Drill it down to 3 KPIs. Very easy to remember. And then as long as everyone understands what is it that we are after, focus and vision, I think that's most important. That's where it starts. And then holding people accountable. I'm a strong believer in single points of accountability. Otherwise, it often, this is what happens, right? Finger pointing to different directions. But I have an example that you just made me think of when it comes to trust and then holding people accountable. And maybe a bit jumping back to that question that we just had. A few years ago, we had a big project in Sweden. I was working with a business leader over in Sweden, and the customer had asked if we wanted to delay the project, and of course that would have a financial impact on us. And yes, I was certainly in this driver's seat of needing to bring in the financials, but also giving the customer what they wanted, and yet showing trust to the employee in Sweden, who is empowered, who expects to be empowered to make those decisions, and yet to be held accountable by me for the financial results. So it's a bit of a interesting discussion or conflict, maybe, to that we have had about, okay, whose decision is it, and how do we deal with that? And at the end of the day, I did trust her. We had difference of opinion about whether we say yes or no on the delay. I trusted her with the decision, but also then held her accountable for the results financially later, right? To make up for that. So that's always a give and take, and I think best served to have an open, very transparent discussion about it.
Exactly. And there's one more comment here about trust in the chat here. So one more question on trust. You're talking about trust is often built and understood differently across cultures. What are some specific approaches or practices you recommend to establish and maintain trust among team members from diverse backgrounds? And Julia, you already mentioned the diversity moment as one tool where you share your backgrounds based on questions you pose, but maybe Signe, you also have something to add here, some tips or tricks or how to build trust across cultures.
I think everyone. I'm a psychotherapist. I think everyone should attend therapy for several years. And short of that, self-awareness is really great for building trust, because when a leader can step into the arena and saying, okay, I'm here navigating different time zones. This is a very complex issue we're dealing with. We have, let's hear it. I want to hear where people are. I want to, and showing the openness and vulnerability themselves without losing their stature, let's say, as a leader. That's a beautiful thing, and it requires a certain poise. It requires some stamina as a human being. And what I actually experience time and again is leaders coming into my practice and saying, I have this team, I have to motivate them, so I have to be friendly and nice and give them a pat on the back, but there are things that are not working and I don't know how to address it.
Mm-hmm.
So having this, okay, I need to actually be honest a little bit, but I don't know how to do it across cultures. And there, when we have Nordic leaders, many of them have been trained in, I have to trust, I have to push out the ability to work, and I have to be very empathetic. But Kim Scott wrote a book called Radical Candor, and in that book she talks very, very well, in my opinion, about ruinous empathy.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that if you're not able to say, hey, that's just not okay, you have to deliver, you said that this is our KPI, you said, but doing it from not flipping out, not so, again, having some self-awareness of your tools and how you impact people when you get annoyed, or truthful or honest or radically candid, then most people can handle it. Most employees can handle it, no matter which time zone or culture, personality you are. If you can feel that this comes from a place of, we have a common goal, as Julia says, we have one aim, and that is for a company, we need to earn money. So what's going on? How do we bridge us and our expectations? So radical candor, I think, is a great way to start.
And so, Julia, you also talked about how getting to know one another on a more personal level helps build up that trust, and also using that to work better together in the daily setting. So what are some of the things you've done with your teams to ensure that if they weren't there when you did the diversity moments, to ensure that trust was built? So you talk about the North Star, the accountability part, but have you done other kind of team building like activities, or is that necessary? And is it maybe more necessary when we have people from different cultures? What's your experience?
Yeah, or when the team is newly put together or just went through a bigger restructuring or some other event, right? Or some maybe mergers, acquisitions, different company cultures also coming together.
Yes.
I think I remember once I was part of a exercise that actually addressed that a bit more head on, and we went around the room based on this theory, and I think there's also a book to it, Moving at the Speed of Trust, and it was going around the room and just simply saying why you can trust me. Yes. You can trust me because blah blah blah, and then certainly it is the more open dialogue can happen, the more a bit of vulnerability you show.
Yes. So that's a Stephen Covey book on the speed of trust, where there are a bunch of exercises around how to build trust, and one of them, as you say, is why can you trust me? And another question could also be who do you trust? So just starting those conversations across the different people in the team. I wanted to show you another little thing. So I spoke before about, there are challenges, but there are also opportunities. So we talked about communication, also language barriers, authority and respect, and decision making, and how we very often see maybe some conflicts arise based on that. We have, the direct or indirect communication style. We have language barriers. Do you even get what I'm saying? And you have the authority and respect. How do you earn it? Do I need your permission to go ahead, or what's the case here? And then decision making. Should we talk about it? Should it be more consensual, or should we just expect the leader to make the decision? But it also poses certain opportunities. When you look into the research behind multicultural teams, it's very interesting how we see that many teams actually outperform others when they are more multicultural diverse. And maybe that's because people, like you said, Signe, needs to be more curious in their investigation about what's actually going on and what can we take for granted. And I have more perspectives. I see it from this point of view, and that might create better customer journeys. And we also have, the authority and respect, maybe finding ways to earn respect rather than just expect it, and accelerated problem solving. So maybe this explains part of, why some of these teams here actually outperform other teams. One of the things we said when we invited for this webinar was that research shows that companies in the top quartile for ethnic and cultural diversity outperform those in the fourth quartile by, I think we said 36 in the invite, but actually new research from McKinsey shows that it's 39% in profitability, which is quite a big number, right? What do you think is going on here? Why is it that when it works well and you laid the ground for it, that these teams with more diversity in them actually outperform less diverse teams?
Can I start off? It's really interesting because you are underlining, Pernille, the fact that when they work, right? When they work well, then you have really well-performing teams. And I think it's incredibly important for the diversity and inclusion agenda and for working across cultural teams that we realize the challenges that are in it, because only when we actually look at them straight up and talk about them and talk about the risks that they carry with them, then we empower leaders of these teams and HR personnel who are dealing with these teams to deal with the conflicts and the kind of the traction when it comes. So I think what these companies have found out is that it's okay to talk about the fact that we're different. It's okay to say, I am not sure I understand your culture. Let me hear. It's okay to say, I'm a little bit out of my depth. Can someone help me here? And you can still be a good leader. But being honest about it, also about there are differences of interest. There we have religious differences, we have philosophical differences, we have political differences. We cannot make those differences go away, and we can't pretend they're not there. And we will once in a while run into them also at work, even if we try not to. So these differences that we have are forcing our companies to think, okay, maybe we should have a contingency plan. When someone runs into something, we have their back. It's not because they are crazy that there's a conflict in their team. It's because it's natural. When there are very, very, very big differences, there will be conflicts, and none of us are just by ourselves very, very good at handling these conflicts. We should have support from HR, and HR should have support from someone who knows their way around in dealing with these conflicts in a way that's good for the company and for the aim of the company.
And Julia, perhaps you are one of the examples of someone who has actually managed to build a great multicultural team. So what kind of effects or results have you seen based on that? And do you recognize some of the things that when you look into research, it says that we have more innovation, we have more perspectives, we have better customer journeys and more profitability?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think that's from a pure business perspective, you at more diverse team can quicker see more risks and more opportunities. than a more homogeneous team that's just based on consensus, right? The more conflict there is, healthy conflict, the more you have a healthy discussion about risks and opportunities. But I also think that a multicultural team makes it much more fun to work. Most people sign up to work in a global organization also because they find it so interesting to learn about the different cultures, or to have the opportunity, include myself, having the opportunity to move across continents with the company, or to explore different cultures. I used to work in internal audit, where I had always two passports, one because one was always with some embassy to get the visa for the next gig. And then we were always 3 to 4 weeks somewhere on site, maybe Iran or Jamaica or Latin America. So it was absolutely exciting. Back then, it was my lifestyle. Now I'm happy to be more grounded in Denmark. But, that made the job an exciting lifestyle, the different cultures. And I could imagine that other people, think similarly, and find it just very exciting, besides the actual day job, to also learn from different cultures, learning how it is to work with someone in China in a conference call, or in a cross-continental work stream or so. Yeah, I think that's another benefit that a lot of companies think are benefiting from.
Nice.
Can I just add a little bit, Pernille?
Yeah, sure.
The companies I work with, most of them realize that cross-cultural teams are the only teams that really work for them in developing their business. That their business is too complex to reduce to something that can be handled by 5 white guys in Northern Jutland. They have to get some other perspectives, not because the 5 guys are not having a great time and maybe having a lot of fun, but because they don't have the languages, they don't have the insights, and they don't have enough kind of a difference of opinion to force each other out of the shell. The issue here is that when we then get someone in who is really different, can we make them bloom and flower in our midst, if we are very similar, the rest of us? So this is of course the conundrum. But when we manage to make everyone feel at home, feel they belong, and feel they can contribute with everything they come with, then we have, that's amazing, isn't it? These teams are just amazing to contribute to the company.
And what are, just to sum up, because we are nearing the end of this webinar, time is really passing by quickly. Just to sum up, I know you've already mentioned tips and tricks and tools for anyone who are facing working with or in a multicultural team, and maybe also facing some of the challenges, and would now like just a bit more advice on how to take it to the next level. What are some of the things we can do? Sine, you mentioned showing vulnerability as a leader, admitting that you don't know it all, being very curious, investigative in terms of understanding where people are coming from and how messages are perceived. Are there any other things that you can tell people out there looking for some advice on how to build great multicultural teams?
I think if
so
I
maybe
could just
not the last part doesn't pay off. We know it pays off, but
I think one of the very, very cheap ways of doing it is inviting people for lunch. So having people who are sitting in similar positions, so team leads or people on the ground level, whomever, into a group in an ability to be vulnerable and sharing stories. Firstly, it has a great effect on yourself to get your narrative straight. What is my narrative on me? The difference that I bring, no matter who I am, and what have I encountered in my life that I found difficult, that I can share with others and inspire them to grow in their leadership. Know that my mistakes are not only for me, but they're for everyone, and also my successes. These groups are amazing. And too few people or companies use it's very, very simple tool. to put people together. Then reverse mentoring I love that as well. So inviting someone from a diverse group, or just someone who just joined us, to talk to me about how is it arriving in our company. That's just, we use the exit interviews, but the arrival interviews with top leadership from younger people or new people from after half a year. How was it? That is also very inspirational. In my experience.
Great advice, Julia.
Yeah, bringing people together, of course, is great. Always face to face, and those, as you said, I know, over coffee, over lunch, and that's how I think trust is built. But if that's not possible, I love panel discussions. Right, this could be done over lunch and learn virtually as well, internally. I've done that.
Discussions, what do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, in large corporations, you usually have these employee resource groups on different topics. I personally was part of the LGBT group in the US, then of a women leadership group in the Nordics, and panel discussions may be like in per face to face in an auditorium, or just online, where these type of anecdotes or stories are being shared by leaders, but maybe not only leaders, but also, as Sina said, newcomers in the organization. How was it? How did you get on board? What did you see? Just to, share personal experience. It's the first step to opening a door and opening a conversation. And I think that's a great way of building trust and getting to know each other.
That's great and very, very concrete advice. So I want to show you as a last resource, maybe this one here, 8 tips to make multicultural teams work. So maybe to sum up actually what you've said about learning and acknowledging, and there are comparison to tools. So we have Erin Meyer's tools, but there's also the Hofstede tools. But basically it could also be just share and care, like you just talked about, Julia, in panels or during lunch, or just some of those places where you can share things that's coming from your cultural background or your traditions or the habits where you grew up. And then be curious and non-judging. I think this was very much what you also talked about. Sine, when you talked about being open to being vulnerable, but also just saying, oh, I'm curious to learn. And then you mentioned the purpose, Julia. Unite around your purpose. Be sure that you're here to do great work together, and just repeat that, of course, and have the KPIs align up towards it. And then you talk very much about building trust and communication, and ask, what did we agree on before we move on, because language is tricky. So those tips here, it seems like you've just without even we agreeing on this, touched upon some of these tips that were shared here. Anything that hasn't been mentioned that you would like to say now when we are nearing the end of this webinar?
Pernille, there was just one on there that I can't help to comment on, but be mindful of humor. I had just arrived in Denmark, and in Denmark you have this motto you live by: don't take yourself too seriously, right? And jantelån, right? And I was in one of those online meetings, and a typical thing, I was on mute and didn't know I talked, and I came off mute and said, "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute." And someone said, a Dane said, "Well, maybe it was better that way," and everyone was laughing hysterically, and I was shocked. But now hindsight, I know that was just really funny. That's Danish humor. Love it. So refreshing.
But be mindful of it, right? So have you also encountered that humor can be offending?
Oh, at that point it was offending. I had no clue about that Danish jantelån and the humor.
No.
But now I can laugh about it too.
Sine.
I just today heard a story of a CEO who, at their annual summer party, after a couple of hours of dancing and funny jokes and all that, dressed up as a woman. And people liked it. They thought it was fantastic. And I could imagine that not with every culture around the world would that be fitting. But maybe if you've been in the company for even a brief amount of time, you would realize, okay, so this is the way we trust this guy because he's real and dares to be real. So the trust is built through him being humiliated, you could say, in some cultures. So it's just this, it was just such a great example of how complex these things are and how beautiful they are when they succeed, because he managed to, I spoke to a couple of people who are very, very, very happy with the way he conducted his leadership. We lost Pernille.
Did we? And I think we hit the hour. Not for the guests to close the meeting, but right.
Most likely, yeah.
Yeah. But
thank you, Julia. It was lovely.
Thank you very much, Sina. Yes, I think it was a great discussion.
Yeah.
I hope everyone enjoyed it. And
yes, I hope so too. And I look forward to
catch up through LinkedIn, or if there's any follow-up questions through Pernille, of course.
Yeah. And also to read the comments, because yeah, exactly. Quite a humorous way of ending the meeting. Thanks, Darius.
Right.
A Danish humor way. That was lovely. Darius, it doesn't sound as if you're Danish, but you got the Danish style humor, that's for sure. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Got nothing inside, wanna watch the world passing by. With you by my side, maybe this ride could make things right.